G'day everyone and welcome to my art channel Brushes with Beck. Once again we are working on my red kangaroo drawing that I started a few weeks ago. I'm going to link those up in the cards above and down in the comments below if you want to look at this drawing from my first video of it and up into this stage that we're working on now. Now, if you haven't watched those videos, I am working on a sheet of pastel matte board. This is the dark grey pastel matte, and I am using primarily faber-castell Polychromos colour pencils with a few very odd occasion of Derwent Drawing pencils in here. Now, what you see me working on at the moment is one of the ears of the kangaroo. This is the ear that is further away on this other side of the head. A lot of this ear is actually quite out of focus, and so even though there's a lot of detail and a lot of hair on this ear as there is on the other ear, a lot of it is blurred out of focus towards the tip. So I had a bit of a challenging time including that texture and those hairs while also keeping it out of focus. So I may have to blur some areas a little more as I get towards the end of this piece and I just see how it all looks together. So I've started already with underlayers in place that I put in the previous week's video, and I'm just working in the fur detail and texture over those underlayers. I find that getting in really, not so much detailed underlayers, but really accurate underlayers in terms of the color tone and the value of those layers is really beneficial to a very straightforward and easy application of fur detail and texture. So I've laid in a lot of color in those base layers, built that up over, a number of layers, used my cotton bud to blend out those layers to make them smooth, and then working in the texture over the top. And I'm using very, very sharp pencils for my fur texture. I'm using a wide variety of warm and cool greys, a few browns, a little bit of, I think it's Caput Mortem Violet or something similar, and just working in those fur textures. It is a very long process, and some areas of fur I find really challenging, others are quite simple, but it's a matter of I'm trying to be consistent, really consistent throughout the whole piece, pay very close attention to my reference photo, and really make this nice and accurate. Now you can see I'm being very scribbly with those underlayers as I apply them. I'm really not too worried about that because on pastel matte they do blend out so easily with that cotton bud and become very, very smooth. And then once I add the fur texture over the top anyway, any inconsistencies in that smoothing out process become unnoticeable. So I'm not very worried about that at all. So you see me coming towards the end of the ear there, and it is, you can see, like how I said earlier, there's not a lot of fur detail on it towards the top because in my photo it's out of focus, so you can't actually see all those hairs, although there is a hint of it there in terms of different color textures, and that doesn't really make sense, but you can see sort of a little bit of texture on the ear, and I think that's just the out of focus fur over the top of the ear. So I've used the cotton bud a little bit to just blend out towards the top areas of the ear a little bit more and work down towards those sharper areas at the bottom of the ear. And of course I have to get supervision from my cat Jasiri. So this, I'm just putting in some fur strokes over the top of that ear that I hadn't placed in when I did the first ear, and that's because they needed to go over the top of the detail from that ear on the other side of the head. So finally, ears complete, I can move on to some other areas of this kangaroo drawing, and like I said earlier, popping in those messy base layers, and they blend out really, really easily with that cotton bud. I find the Derwent Drawing pencils don't blend out quite as smoothly with a cotton bud. They can be a little bit clumpy by comparison, but if you are layering Derwent Drawing pencils well, you blend those out with the pencils themselves and they become lovely and smooth, and you can blend Faber-Castell Polychromos over the top without any problems. So you can see I'm using the Mars Violet there from the Derwent Drawing range, and that's because that area there is in shadow, and that purple is a lovely complement to the orange tones in the kangaroo's fur. And then I'm going in really dark and making sure I'm getting in those values correct in those base layers before I add in too much detail. So as you can see, blending out very, very easily with that cotton bud. I don't apply very much pressure when I do that because I don't want to scratch the pastel mat in a way or create indentations in that with the cotton bud. And I'm just gliding that over the surface. It will take off some of the pigment, but then you just layer down again to get it, to get a stronger pigment down. Now, if you are enjoying this video, please ask that you give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below if you like, and also subscribe to my channel so you can keep up to date with my weekly videos. Now, for those of you who aren't too familiar with either Derwent Drawing pencils or the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils, I do actually have a comparison video that I did where I drew the same image twice on the same piece of paper, once with Faber-Castell Polychromos and once with the Derwent Drawing pencils with as similar colours as possible. And you can compare those two, the process of me drawing those two and the end result side by side in that video. So I'm going to link that up in the cards above as well if you're interested, just so you can get an idea of what the difference is between these two pencils, how they might work differently, and the end results that they produce. Derwent Drawing pencils are of course a wax-based pencil, and the Faber-Castell Polychromos are an oil-based pencil. So there are some differences in the use and how they apply down on the paper, but overall they are both fantastic pencils and both have their uses. So like I said, I prefer to blend the Derwent Drawing pencils with other pencils. I prefer to blend them out as I use them, whereas the Faber-Castell Polychromos on a surface such as PASTELMAT, I really love to blend with the cotton bud because it works so well. It's so easy to do and you get such a lovely result from it. Now I'm building up colour in this shadow area here. Like I said, I used a Mars Violet underneath there for those purpley tones to contrast that orange fur. And I'm also going in with browns and some grey tones and going in with dark sepia as well and some warm greys to really get the impact of those shadowed areas and that fur texture in that area. Now, as I work up these base layers of the cheek, you can see I've gone in fairly light to begin with. I'm mapping in the colours a little bit, defining some areas on the fur and where those colour changes are, and blending them out. And then I go in again with some more colours. I make it a bit darker. I might use some slightly different colour tones or the same ones again, and just layer over the top to improve that on that colour. And the same with under the neck there, because if you have really good base layers, it makes it so much easier to finish off your piece with those textures and details. So at the moment, the base layers on my cheek are very simple. It's simply just a colour map at this stage, and laying in more colour on there, applying more value and greater colour range is going to make it so much easier to complete this piece. So I find that sometimes when I first look at an area, it can be hard to tell what I need to do as a base layer. So I might pick sort of a medium tone colour from that area and lay that in, and once I've got sort of base layers down for that area, I might look back at my reference photo and say, okay, what else do I need to improve on? And you can see here it's mainly that shadow area, that dark corner I had to improve. The richness of that reddish tone, I think it was Caput Mortem Violet or something similar, and also improve on how dark those valleys were, using some dark sepia and the darkest warm grey down in that corner to really bring that out, and then also exaggerate some of the highlighted areas where the pale areas of fur are. And you can already see how much of a difference just adding in more base layers has made. It's really rich, really vibrant. The values are already really good, and it's going to it's going to make for a more realistic piece by having, it's basically a values map and a color map for when you're laying in all your detail. And I find it so much easier to not get lost with my detail when I have a really good color map underneath, when I've got really strong base layers that are going to support my detail. So make sure you are not stingy with your base layers, and there's no reason to be stingy with base layers on PastelMat because it takes so many layers without hesitation. It just, more color, all right, lay it down. We'll see how we go. Like, it just keeps taking color. So there's no need to be shy with how many layers you add underneath. If you want to keep building up color, PastelMat will just take that color. That's no problem at all. So I just find that if you really want to make life easier for yourself, put in lots of color early on and blend it out, and then add your detail to refine on what you've already done underneath. So your fur texture and your detail doesn't need to do all the work. It should be supporting the work you've done underneath already. And without those mapped in base layers, I find it's very easy to get lost in large areas of fur. You can lose track of where you are in a piece, but having that worked in really nicely underneath makes it so much easier to just work in the detail that you need without getting lost. So you can see I'm using really quite short pencil strokes in this area. I'm varying the direction a little bit because the fur isn't super neat on this kangaroo's cheek. It's a little bit sort of frizzy in a way. It's quite dense. It's not super coarse, but it's not super soft. So I'm just making sure I follow that fur length and direction very carefully on my reference photo, and going in with the cinnamon over top as a really light glaze just to add some warmth in over those greys. And as I move up the side of the cheek here behind the eye, you'll see that my pencil strokes get even shorter. And that's something that's really, really crucial, and I've really learned to do a lot better in this piece, is to pay very close attention to the length of my fur strokes, because they will make all the difference in your piece. So the fur strokes on the body are quite a bit longer, and the same with under the neck there, and there's some quite long fur strokes at the base of that ear there that you see at the top of this video at the moment. And then on the cheek they get a bit shorter, and then up towards the side of the eye they are even shorter again. I'm just doing the tiniest little dashes to represent those strands of fur. Now those strands of fur are actually longer than what I'm drawing, but when you are looking at a photo of an animal, you are not seeing the entire length of that animal's fur strands. You're only seeing what's at the surface that's not buried underneath other pieces of fur. So I find to be really mindful when you are drawing fur is to remember that you're not seeing the entire fur strand. So you're only seeing a short piece of the fur, so you need to draw the fur shorter than what you know it is, if that makes sense. Because I find otherwise I'm thinking, oh, look at this fur, and I draw it the length that I know it is rather than the length that I see it, if that makes sense. And there is my cat Jasiri again. I had to slow down this section because her beautiful eye there was just, I had to admire it. I thought you guys might appreciate that too. So she's been quite active during this section of recording. She just very needy in the last few days, just needing lots of attention. So it makes it very, very hard to work when they can still walk in front of my work, but at least they can't walk on top of it anymore. So as I was saying, with the length of the fur strands, you can see how short that fur is on that area of the cheek there, and it moves into the longer area lower down on the cheek, and it makes an absolutely huge difference there. So I've worked in my dark fur strands with a very, very sharp pencil, and then I've worked in a slightly lighter brown, and then I've gone to my lighter colors, and I'm working in those light first strands around those dark strands. So I'm not just going anywhere over the top, I'm working around my existing first strands that I've laid in. So it's, like I said, very time consuming process, but it's absolutely worth it in the end when you get a really good result. And pay, like I said, pay very close attention to that reference photo to get it as close as possible, and make sure that you're representing those colors and those values correctly. So once again, using the cinnamon color there simply as a glaze over the top. I've got it quite blunt. It's a very, very light application, just to add a little bit of warmth into some areas there. So that's as much work as I've managed to progress on with this piece, but it's coming along really, really nicely, and I'm very, very pleased with it. I hope you guys are enjoying it too. Like I said, I'm going to link up above in the cards and down below in the description for links to the other parts of this series. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you again next week for another video. Stay creative.